The worst terror attack in the United Kingdom since 7/7, and the worst terror attack the north of England has known in modern times, started, as these things tend to do, with a lot of confusion and with a lot of confusing messages and more noise than light coming from social media. I think the first few minutes of the night of May 22nd sort of encapsulated some of the challenges we face today. The first reports came through of a loud bang. There were claims on social media that it was a bomb. It was a speaker stand at the arena which had blown up. So we had some very quick decisions to make about what we were reporting straight away. And in the sense that this theme about what do we publish now when everyone else is publishing stuff is part of the challenge we face. It was quite apparent though from very early on in the first few minutes that something substantial had happened. The scale of, I was in the city centre when I got the call, and as I was heading back to the office I saw this chain of ambulances flying down Deansgate, one of the main routes through Manchester, and I could see the police cordon being thrown up, and it was quite obvious whether it was through malice or panic something dreadful had happened. So I headed back to the office, and we were, I hope Cressida's gone now, probably breaking every law known to man, not driving while making phone calls, talking to colleagues in the office to motivate and get the team out. So we were doing all the things you do as a journalist. We got people to the scene. We had people at hospitals. We were live blogging. We were Facebooking. We were telling the press, hang on for her first edition, clear some space for us, wondering what we were up against. And then it kind of became clear the scale of what we were facing. The first reports were of 2 dead, and then there was this ghastly moment in the office when one of the guys on my team, Lee Swetnam, was following social media, following the police tweets, and it suddenly came through that they were, in fact, it was definitely a bomb, and 19 people had died. And there was this kind of pause in the office for about 20 seconds, and some of you may be in other newsrooms at the time trying to suddenly absorb this information about what had happened. And I think within those first few minutes, 3 key themes started to emerge for us, and through the course of the night as we worked flat out on the web, which is a lot of what we do these days, and as we started to compile 34 pages for the later edition, key themes came through. The first of which I think was responsibility. The eyes of the world were upon us. In the first few days, 10 million people came to our website from around the world. 7 out of 10 Mancunians came to our website in the first few days. And it was very down to us to be, people were coming to us for accurate information, and therefore our trust was on the line. We've been doing this for 149 years in Manchester. We had to get it right. So trust through accuracy of coverage and decency of coverage, I think, is also an important theme I'll come back to. I think the other thing that very clearly came to mind quickly was, how do you cope when it's your own city? We'd all sat and done live blogs from Batalan and from Westminster Bridge, and so suddenly it's your own town. We weren't even sure who was in there. There were 14,000 people in the arena that night. We didn't know if there were people we knew and cared about, because messages were going out. And in fact, one of the guys who was killed, Martin Hett, I didn't know him myself, but a lot of my colleagues did. He'd done some journalism for us. He was the world's greatest Coronation Street fan. He had Deirdre tattooed on his leg. He's a fantastic guy. I've got to know his mum since, but when it's your own town, you see it through a different prism, I think, in that sense. And I think very early on we realised that we had a job to do to think about mending the wounds. Our city was hurting that night very badly, and we had a big job to do to set things right. What could we do with this enormous reach we have as a local media provider? But coming back to that theme of accuracy, first and foremost, without that we are nothing. And I think we saw within those first couple of hours the challenges we face. We were seeing images appearing on social media of people who were said to be missing, and some of those images did appear in substantially well-known websites, news websites, and they were missing. People who were missing from South America. There was a picture shared on social media which purported to be a picture from inside the foyer of the Manchester Arena. You could see pictures of bodies on the ground. In fact, it was from a still from a training video. And this is rush to publish is the danger we face. We talk about, there's been discussion about real news versus fake news. I think the other factor is, let's think about this stuff happening in real time. You're seeing stuff appearing, being published, and you kind of, they've published it, so and there's a it's not panic, but there's a kind of, its stuff is out there, therefore it's starting to circulate, therefore it's become true, therefore we'll publish it. It's just not as simple as that. I mean, a good example for me going into the following morning, a couple of organisations were starting to name one of the child victims. I think one of the worst things about the attack was so many kids were affected, but there was a child named as being killed. And from what we could establish, it was entirely based on her Facebook page. One of her pals or somebody who was a friend had said RIP. I'm sorry, that's just not enough. And we can't sit here and be all high-minded about fake versus real when we're publishing stuff based on what one kid says on another kid's Facebook page. I mean, we waited for the school to give us confirmation. And I think it was very important that night that we were very clear. I made it very clear to our readers. I tweeted about 20 past 1 in the morning, whatever you see on our website, we have verified. And we were absolutely instilled it into the team that night. That was so important. And I actually wrote a comment piece, which I put out about 3 a.m, talking about the kind of things we were going to do as journalists, mainly about helping to sort of heal our city's wounds. And I wrote that for our readers. I wrote it for me and my team as much as anyone. But it was very important that we set our stall out, because trust, without that, we hadn't got anything, basically. So those were the first few hours, but I think what was fascinating as the story proceeded was, and this is, I know we're going into discussion shortly about, are we doing the terrorist job for them? I think what happened in the next few days was transformative in the sense that the story became how the city of Manchester and its people responded. This was a scene in Manchester the following evening when 10,000 people packed into Albert Square for a vigil. I've forgotten when I saw this picture what a sunny, lovely week it was. We had no idea whether there was still a terrorist cell possibly working in Manchester at the time. Still, people came in, they weren't frightened off. And in a sense, this is what, are they scaring us and stopping us going about our lives? And 10,000 people said that night, no, you're not. And that was the night when Tony Walsh, the Manchester poet, read his famous poem now about which the poem sort of encapsulates all the kind of self-mockery and big-headedness of Manchester. I was talking to Andy Burnham the other day. He said maybe apocryphal story, but when he was a government minister, he commissioned a survey to ask people about opinions of which is the second most important city in the UK, and apparently the Brummies all put down Birmingham, and the Scousers put Liverpool, and the Manchester people put London. So it's so in a sense, Tony kind of caught that mood. So as we were, this is into day 2, and we were reporting on, clearly there were dreadful eyewitness accounts coming through. There were interviews with the families, pictures emerging, but I think how the city responded was so important to our coverage. And in that sense, it was about understanding that we, the Manchester Evening News and its readers, we were going to define how the reporting of this event took place, not the murderer, Salman Abedi. It was down to us and our readers to define the coverage. So, yes, we were doing stories about the political reaction. Theresa May was talking about threat levels at the absolute highest level. There was clearly a question about security, how this had been allowed to happen. This guy was one of the 23,000 under surveillance. There was a massive police operation taking place. There were doors being knocked down all over town. There were police cars racing everywhere. And we were covering all of that, but I think sometimes you're measured by your front pages, aren't you? And we were very keen to make sure that we were capturing a story about the spirit of Manchester. And no, we're wounded, but we're not over. We're not dead. And it was about the city standing together, and we wanted to reflect that in some of our front page coverage, and not let Abedi decide how things were happening. For that reason, I've not used Salman Abedi's picture on page 1 of the MEN, and while I'm editor, I never will. He would love to be on our front page, I'm quite sure, and he did make the front page of a number of newspapers, but certainly the feedback we were getting from our readers and from my own thoughts and the thoughts of my team were, he doesn't deserve to be on our front page, and he certainly does not deserve to be pictured next to the people he murdered. And so we've made sure that's not the case either. We've also been very careful about the language we use. I don't like to refer to him in the paper as the suicide bomber. We call him the murderer. We don't refer to terrorist victims. We call those who were murdered at the arena. And I think there's kind of, semantic issues are important, that we don't let him define the terms. I have actually thought at times, what was he hoping to? Well, what was he hoping to achieve? He never left a note. He left no video, but he must have perhaps at some point thought, I wonder how it will be covered by the media, and then therefore that was a question in our minds. So we didn't want him to define it. We'd rather talk about the amazing people of Manchester, not just emergency services, but guys who are working in the arena, who are working at nearby Victoria Station, men and women who ran towards danger. They had no idea there was no other devices there. It could easily have been two guys working together. They ran towards danger, and I'd rather celebrate them on the front page, to be quite honest. I'd rather talk about what a brilliant multicultural city Manchester is. This was a parade of primary school children which took place in Manchester about 4 or 5 days after the bomb attack. Thinking, well, that'll make a nice picture. We'll Facebook Live it, and well over 2 million people watched that. It became one of the best watched things we did in our coverage. A bunch of school kids walking through Manchester holding Wheel of Manchester posters, which was quite touching. And we covered some of the things that only could happen in Manchester. There's been a terrible thing happening in our city. Let's go and get a bee tattooed on us. 10,000 people had a bee tattoo. Yeah, I quite often do speeches about how we covered the bomb in Manchester, and I usually start with has anyone here got a tattoo? And quite often, has anyone here? Quite often hands do go up. It's amazing how many people you meet have had a tattoo. For those that don't know, the worker bee is the symbol of Manchester from the days of Cottonopolis, the industrious worker, and basically everyone was queuing up, getting a bee tattoo. All the money raised went towards the appeal. So people wanted to do something. That was the key to it. And look, one of the simplest things you can do, but it's very generous, is to hand over some money. So within a few hours of the attack, we launched a Just Giving page. Our contribution towards the overall funds is now £2.5 million of donated by Manchester Evening News readers. People who came to the website wanted to help. There was around about 60,000 donations from 70 countries there, which all went on towards a much larger pot I'll refer to again in a moment. And of course we had, people do like to lay flowers. They certainly did in style in Manchester. I think what was nice about the flowers in St Anne's Square is it wasn't turning the arena into a shrine. The arena's a fairly ugly building on the edge of Manchester city centre. St Anne's Square is the kind of true heart of the city of Manchester, and for those of you journalists who are in Manchester who went to the square, it's normally a very noisy, bustly place. It was packed the whole time. You could hear a pin drop. It was absolutely extraordinary. Something we tried to capture on film, never could, but it was quite something. But there was a concern that, again, coming back to what Abedi wanted to achieve, would people be frightened from visiting Manchester? No, they weren't. About a week after the attack, the Great Manchester Run took place. We were worried people wouldn't turn up, and they were just turning people away. There were so many people wanted to take part in the Great Manchester Run. It was a fantastic moment for us to report on, and it was BBC covered it superbly well also. And they came back again a few days later when Ariana Grande brought herself and many of her co-stars to do the benefit concert. And again, this is incredibly powerful, positive stories about people responding to tragedy at the One Love concert. But we did want to sort of, not lose sight of, this was a tragedy, and we wanted to remember what had happened. And clearly, there's work underway. I'm on one of many committees now, one of which is to build a memorial. But we felt as a newspaper we could do something quite quickly. So we did that with this symbol of the bee. We found a local graffiti artist called Dubek. He's really, really good at bees. I'm not sure he can do horses' heads, but he can definitely do bees. Basically, that is, if you ever go to Manchester, you have a hangover, go to the Coffee Pot in the Northern Quarter. It's the best cafe in Manchester, and that's the wall of the Coffee Pot. There's 22 bees on there, effectively one for each of those who lost their lives. So that was how we have started to commemorate it. The bigger piece of work, which the MEN has played a big part in contributing money and publicity, is the emergency fund. As I said, we raised £2.5 million. The overall fund has topped £18 million in total. I'm one of the trustees of the charity, working with the brilliant Red Cross and Manchester Council. We've already handed out £14 million to those affected. We've made substantial payments to the bereaved, to those who are badly injured. It now appears that more than 40 people have life-changing injuries. So that's the scale of it, and terrible injuries. And you think that's how many young victims there were. This is people need support for the rest of their lives. So we've given out £14 million as gifts. Some of the money has gone to people who've suffered mental trauma, which is probably for the first time that has happened. The Red Cross feel no one's handed out money for mental trauma before, but there were around about 300 people in the close vicinity of the explosion who saw terrible things and are deeply troubled by it. And we're still, there's a lot of people. I worry about my own team. It was bloody tough for them to cover this, and for me. But we are helping people. We've kept some money back because the assessment of some of these people's injuries is still being established. So what's really annoying, and we have splashed a couple of times now, is a pathetic lack of government support. Manchester has had about £180,000 for mental health support, and they generously waive the VAT fees on the memorial concert, which only took place because there'd been a bomb attack. I thought that was dismal, and so we are raising this with the government, and we'll continue to do so. So we're several months on from May the 22nd. Obviously there's thoughts already towards the anniversary, but we felt pretty much from day one we wanted to do something more permanent, more lasting, that would actually turn this dreadful negative into a positive. So I worked for some time particularly with the Peace Foundation, which an organisation based in Warrington that was created with a lot of support from Mo Mowlam on the back of the murder nearly 25 years ago of two little kids who were killed by an IRA attack in Warrington. And we put together this thing, which is the We Stand Together campaign, which we launched a few weeks ago. It's got three aims. One is to fight hate crime in all of its forms. We've seen, sadly, a rise in hate crime in Manchester, and all of it is equally dreadful, so we're fighting that. We're doing simple things around encouraging acts of kindness, which sounds a bit simple, but actually it's a lovely thing to do, building towards a special Manchester's Day of Random Acts of Kindness Day we're going to do in the spring of next year. But the main focus is about education, and with Nick Taylor, the Chief Executive of the Peace Foundation, we're working with the councils and with the Mayor on a plan to put peace studies onto the curriculum of every primary and secondary school in Manchester. So we've already got some money for some pilots for this. We're going to really work hard to get every school teaching kids about conflict resolution, that you can live with people who are different, you can understand them, and we want that to be a pilot running across the whole of Manchester, eventually across the whole of the country. Will be a nice legacy for these people, the 22 who lost their lives cut needlessly short. And it was a dreadful day in Manchester's history, but we certainly feel as journalists we can tell the story, we can start to right some wrongs, and really act as a voice to unify our community, and that's where we've been for the past few months. So thank you very much for your time. I look forward to taking questions with the other panellists afterwards. Thank you.